with the citizens of the country to create laws that will serve the community that they represent. So I am happy to be sitting here on behalf of Ms. Marcia Weeks, who is not able to be with us, but she's here with us in spirit and sending her love. So we're gonna start the discussion. We had a hearing this morning at the Inter-American Commissions on Human Rights. You guys did an exceptional jobs, and you should definitely clap for yourself for representing Barbados. So without further ado, I want to go directly into Dr. Ferdinand Nichols to talk to us about
the hearing today.
Yes, if you can give us a little bit of update.
Thank you so very much. It's a particular honor of mine to be with you this evening. I found myself having to assume the responsibility of leading the team after Marcia regrettably was unable to join us for circumstances that she was not aware of. But it certainly is a joy to be with you tonight and to share some of the experiences we've had so far since we have been here. We came to Washington to represent the civil society of Barbados because in our home country at the moment we're facing a cybercrime bill that is designed to, in a sense, silence the freedom of expression and freedom of speech of our people in Barbados. The government has implemented an aspect of the bill which, while we acknowledge the fact of the necessity to police the aspect of internet accessibility and so on, the aspects that we engaged would have led to the criminalization of the ordinary citizen simply for hurting your feelings, or for offending you, or disturbing your peace of mind. These are elements that are absolutely ridiculous. I mean, we have very robust discussions as individuals, and we can get very passionate about what we believe and what we think, and we can walk away without conflict. And so today we had an opportunity to present the civil society's case to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. And there were 5 of us. We had attorney at law from right here in Washington. There was Timon as well, a young lady by the name of Shakwani, another young man by the name of Donald, and myself. And each one of us represented the civil society from a different perspective. Donald represented the aspect of social media platforms and so on. Timon represented the areas of arts and entertainment. Actually was one of the most pointed, and I felt emotionally impactful of all of the presentations. When people realize that persons within those types of industry, their ability to generate revenues and so forth were now under threat. Of course, we then had Shakwani representing Marcia from the aspect of media and activism. The capacity to oppose something where government is concerned and find yourself censored simply because you do not agree. I represented the faith-based aspect of our country, where, of course, as you know, their freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of interaction, freedom of sharing, all of these are human rights aspects that every person in every country ought to be able to have the liberty of sharing, experiencing, utilizing social media platforms, utilizing digital formats and so on. I, for one, do many of my services on YouTube and Facebook. And it's possible under the current proposal by the Barbados government that a person who is offended by something I may say in terms of the expression of our doctrine could take me to court, and if I am found guilty, I would be faced with a fine of $50,000 or 10 years in jail. That is serious, because we do have a Defamation Act in Barbados, which facilitates persons who feel that they have been defamed. If you're found guilty, I believe the charge is around $2,700. That would be about what, $1,350 US. and it's not a criminalization of your involvement. Uh, in this case of the cybercrime bill, if I defame you, I have to now pay, if I'm found guilty, 50,000 US dollars. Or I will, and or, the bill says and or. So I could find myself fined 50,000 US plus going to jail for 10 years. Not up to 10 years where they could say, well, maybe a year, 2 years. The bill specifically says very clearly 10 years. And so we were very happy to be able to present it to the commission today. The government was also represented, I must say, very ineffectively and very condescending to the people of Barbados, which I took really quite seriously because civil society in Barbados has a right to express its dissatisfaction with the things that the government is doing. And that's one of the freedoms of expression that is currently under threat.
Excellent. Before we come to Dr. Nathan Wangasu from Kenya, we're going to move into Mr. Timon Howard. You did an exceptional job today. I was able to listen to your presentation. But can you take us back a little bit to the history of this bill? How did it come about? I know it was presented toward the end of 2023, and it went into the House. The first version got passed, around June this summer, and then it's now before the Senate. Can you talk to us about it? How did the government come to create these bills, and where did it come from, and how is it impacting your work?
Brilliant questions, some of which I will attempt to answer, some of which I will not. Some of which I also have as well, like where did this bill come from? You know, what was the process that they used to determine what they decide is rightful to criminalize, etc. By what process did they come to the conclusion that what they drafted was necessary and was sound as a piece of legislation? All questions that many of us have. Not sure I have the answers to those. They would have the answers to those. But what I can tell you about is when it would have came to my attention. That would have been when a colleague of mine and a fellow peer at UWI, the University of the West Indies Cape Town campus in Barbados, would have brought to my attention the bill, and I would have reviewed it in its entirety, and I also mentioned only particularly on the aspects which I then moving forward would have represented and voiced some concerns about, specifically being section 19, subsection 3, and section 20, subsection 1, both of which, as Dr. Nichols would have stated, were very vague and subjective in their frame of what can be criminalized and what you can be charged for eliciting the person. When it is that you're dealing with emotions, I said this in the Parliament as well, when I gave my submission orally to the Joint Select Committee. As human beings, we are all people with egos and insecurities. So to neglect that fact is to embrace a strange form of naivety, which is utterly unproductive. As people, in having discourse, there's a thing called conflict. Conflict would happen when one idea meets another idea which does not align with said idea, and then these ideas then would rub against each other in some fashion or form until some consensus is reached or attained. Seeking then to, which is as it should, right? If I have an opinion, I believe that we should turn off the AC or we should turn off the lights. You don't want the lights to stay on. Okay, well, the lights are kind of bright up here. It's in my eyes. It's kind of hot on this stage. You're not on this stage. The lights are hot here. I should have a greater say in what happens with the lights. But then you say, well, security-wise, if we turn off the lights, anyone can walk in from the back, and that's harmful, right? Conflicting views. You have discourse back and forth, and you come to sensible conclusions. And somebody may be really passionate about the lights, and they'd be like, well, how can you not understand that I'm on this stage and these lights are so hot, and you can get hot and sweaty about a lot of things. That's just human nature. So to criminalize somebody feeling offended in way of annoyance, intimidation, embarrassment, which was taken out of this new iteration, the bill that they're looking to put forward. Humiliated, you may have said already. Among other things, which are very subjective and not necessarily specifically pinpointed, it is a very dangerous and ticklish line that you're trying to tightrope walk across. And as an artist, being one who tries to address certain issues in society that are not necessarily as cotton candy, sprinkles, butterflies, and rainbows as many things are. It's very hard to do that without risk of offending someone, without risk of stepping on some toes, without risk of maybe in some sense offending someone. And sometimes it's necessary to do so because there are some persons who, if they are allowed to get away with abusing the society, abusing the powers that they have, they will do it. And it's something that needs to be taken to task. And so, without being too superfluous, that is where I came to fall on the bill, and as much as I can say to that at the moment.
Thank you for your contributions. Now, Dr. Wangasi, how do you view these bills, and is there something similar in Kenya, especially with the movement going on with the Gen Zs?
Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to again find myself amongst my brethren. People call you Caribbeans, Haitians, Barbadians. I just call you Africans because you're Africans. So my presence here is very unlikely, by the way. So
It was meant to be.
it was meant to be, but there's a reason I'm going back to why I'm here and how I got here in response to your question. So I was supposed to go for a birthday over the summer. It was a couple of weeks after the end of June. I think it was like the first week of July. We were a contingent of about 10 of us. But when I got to the island, so we're going to Barbados, idea was just to go for a birthday, spend some time with my best friends, then come back. So when I get to the island, halfway through my United Airlines, I believe is the airline I took. They have internet on the plane, so I start getting frantic texts from my friends that we're not going to make it. Apparently, there's a hurricane coming through. So I get to the island, and I immediately realize that the place is going on lockdown because there's a hurricane. There's some sort of wave coming off from the ocean. I was really confused because I've never seen that. I'm a mainland person, as I was telling you. Island people have really interesting,
Welcome to the islands.
experiences. But yeah, immediately I get on the island, I realize that I'm pretty much marooned. The old story of Robinson Crusoe. So it was a really interesting experience. So anyway, I get there and I get into a taxi to try and get to the hotel where I'm staying. Of course, people are panicking and picking the little dogs from the beach, running, and a bit helter-skelter. But I did what the Romans did, or what the Barbadians do. So I ran into a supermarket, bought some supplies. But I was on the way there, on the way to my hotel, I met a lady who told me about Marcia. And told me she noticed I was wearing a bracelet, so she somehow recognized that it was a Kenyan flag. She could tell from my accent, and she told me, "Hey, you're from Kenya. What is going on in Kenya? Oh, it sounds like you're as we were speaking about, you said it'd be really interesting to meet Marcia, who is part of the opposition, and tell about your experiences. Specifically at the time, we were having Gen Z protests. what is really important about those protests, and I think that really maps very well to the issues that we're seeing in the cybercrime bill. The first, which is sort of more systemic, was there's a marked similarity I observed between our president, who is very popular to the rest of the world, but loved at home because of his dictatorial tendencies. And when I started to listen to Barbadians generally, the taxi driver, and then I spoke to Marcia, we met, we had dinner, I realized that your prime minister is the same personality, very popular, very articulate. She's cut herself as a progressive image to the rest of the world. And Marcia told me about the cybercrime bill. And what I told her was, this would not, the protests that are going on in Kenya today would not be possible if you had such a bill in place, number one. Number two, if they tried that in Kenya, let alone passing a economic bill that is unpopular, if we tried to restrict any of the hard-earned rights that Kenyans have fought for generation over generation, they will pour on the streets and raise hell like no other. What Marcia unfortunately told me was, and we kind of came to this kind of description, that the Barbadian society has been, suffers from what they call boiled frog syndrome. The boil has been so slow, so subtle, and so long that Barbadians do not notice that these bills are being brought in slowly by slowly. And then what I also told her was and I took issue, I obviously took a lot of issue with it, because I said an injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. You remember there's this phenomenon called the butterfly effect, that a butterfly flapping its wings in the Caribbean will have ripple effects first in its immediate environment, and by the time it gets to Africa, or by the time it gets to Asia, it's a hurricane or a typhoon. In other words, when it starts becoming acceptable for governments to pass bills like that anywhere in the world. And you remember that the cybercrime bill apparently started as a model legislation, which is what they do in a lot of parts of the world. There's this model legislation around like cybercrime, maritime trade, like international issues. They have model legislation from the EU, the UN. In Kenya, we actually do it at the national level to put laws at the local level that conform to certain human rights and international standards. But what Mia Mottley then did was to take this law and pull it apart to suit her needs. What really also surprised me was the Barbadian society is very, in comparison, we made these comparisons about Kenyans being very feisty and Barbadians being very genteel. I could not tell whether it's gentleness or passiveness. But I knew something was wrong when a friend of mine took me to a supermarket. I think it was a mall. Must be the biggest mall in the island. Sky Mall, exactly. And initially, I wasn't there for very long. So initially, I had this kind of impression that, wow, I've never seen such gentle Africans. They're cool.
That's a polite way to put it.
I've always very, very gentle. But I come to, as we are leaving the mall, I see this young man, must have been in his early 20s, driving, he was driving a small car, and he was stopped by a contingent of very heavily armed officers, and I was like, so I looked to my host for an explanation. I've never seen this anywhere. Has he done anything? He's like, no, that's the task force. And I remember even describing a scene from the book Animal Farm. Someone has deployed their attack dogs against the population, because you're beginning not only to criminalize the youth, young men, but also young behavior. And you're doing it preemptively to stop them from either seeing or reacting to behavior or policies that you preempt or you want to put in place to to subjugate the population. It bothered me a lot. So I started getting engaged in these conversations. And 3 months later, I think I'm an official member of the Barbadian opposition from being a vocationer. It's been a very interesting experience. I met a lot of the young people who are presented today. And I told Marcia, I have hope for this country because of young people like him and his group. In fact, we have a group on WhatsApp called the First Arm of Government, in that the people are the first arm of government and they should hold the government accountable. So these types of laws, for me, it was a more general perspective saying, number one, it sets a precedent. Obviously, we're going to talk about this briefly later on, but there's also involvement of Kenya in the Caribbean, which has some overlaps. But an affront to the rights of free people anywhere is an affront to the rights of free people everywhere. And therefore, I decided to say something. I had choice words for me and Motley, and I haven't shied about making that opinion.
Most definitely. I think with regard to this bill, in my hometown in Haiti, we don't quite yet have one in the work, but anytime that you hear a model piece of legislation, it's something that tells you open your eyes, open your ears, and be on the lookout because you'll be next. It's just similar to what the US have recently produced, the Global Fertility Act, which is a 10-year plan to place the countries under strict regimens that follows US foreign policies. It's being implemented in Haiti. Several countries in Africa is listed among that. So Kenya is being used as the implementator of it in Haiti before it lands in Africa. So when I heard about that legislation, I understand the challenges that we are facing with the internet and the youth and everything. Looking at the bill, some aspects of it are relevant we can look at, but at the same time, we still need to protect our rights as individuals. So as a religious leader, talk to us. How will that impact the folks who are coming to your services, the folks who just needs to be able to express themselves, and the generations to come, what impact that will have on them? Because sometimes someone may just share a message, just, oh, look at this, let me send it to you, knowing that this person may end up being charged just for passing that message along.
Let me address one quick question that you had asked earlier. When did this bill actually began? I think it actually was circulated within the Barbados Bar Association context in 2022. It never actually got to the civil society of Barbados until earlier this year. And there is a process that occurred. It was passed in Parliament. Bills that are passed in Parliament then go to our Senate. And once the Senate ratifies it and it's passed by the Senate, it goes to the President to be signed into law. This bill was passed in the Parliament at the beginning, and it was passed in the Senate. But while it was being passed in the Senate, there was an uproar that came from the civil society of Barbados, and the government pulled back. And it was at that stage that they decided to send it to what was referred to as the Joint Select Committee, which is where it should have gone first, and not even to Parliament first. It should have gone to the civil society for discourse. Today, as we were in the hearing, we heard the lawyer, who is clearly clueless on the realities of what was happening in the country, speak about the myriad of exchanges that the civil society had with Barbados. That's a lie. There was one singular aspect that was the Joint Select Committee. And that was the aspect that government engaged with the civil society. So to suggest that there was dialogue and discussion preceding all that we presented today was just simply not honest. In the context of and currently then, the bill has passed Parliament, which today the same attorney on the behalf of the government attempted to chastise our attorney for referencing an old bill. But the reality is that the bill he referenced was the one that was passed, and the one that we are addressing is technically a draft. But what we saw from the Joint Select Committee was that what the people presented, 1 or 2 changes were made, but then the fines were increased. So technically what the government was saying to the civil society of Barbados is, you know what? We don't care what you have to say. And just so you know, we're going to increase the penalties. So shut up and accept what we say. The aspect of pertaining to aspect of our faith-based community, there are aspects in our Christian doctrine that some can find offensive. Especially in today's world where there is such an aspect of violence present in our midst. There are imageries that we can present, and many of our ministries and ministers now use a lot of imagery. YouTube, they use a lot of productions and presentations and imageries in their messages to get their impact across. And what we observed is that this bill would now be putting us under pressure to literally self-censor in order to prevent offense. Let me give an illustration. One of the fundamental doctrines of the Christian faith is the sacrificial death of Jesus Christ, a very violent one. Crucifixion was not a very pleasant experience, and it was not very pleasant imagery. In some instances, you would see imagery with a soldier piercing the side of his body with a spear. You would see his hands nailed to the cross. It can be very intimidating. It can be, in some instances, offensive to some people. What we began to understand from what the content of some of the aspects of the bill were before they even pulled back some of them, was that that would expose us to the potential of criminal activity and penalties. What would happen then is that it would begin to have an impact on several aspects of doctrinal expression. And ministers would now find themselves having to pull back from expressing some of the things that are in our doctrine, not to be, what's the word I'm looking for, not to be offensive, but to guide persons to a better way of life. Because that sacrificial death of Jesus is intended to lead people to a relationship with God so that they can experience the fullness of their life, as was intended. And so what I've found in Barbados is, regrettably, many of our church leaders are experiencing exactly what you described. They are not taking this matter seriously. I have been in ministry for many, many years. I've also been a candidate for the last election, 2022. And because of my experience on the ground and the years, my family is a very political family. And through the years that we have gone through, I began to realize that our faith aspects are becoming a reality in our lives. And if we are unable to share those aspects of faith that can help a person change the reality of their existence, it becomes problematic. And the bill just simply criminalized what we were attempting to do. The bill emerges out of something that is referred to as the Budapest Convention. And one of the things I have been sharing within the context of Barbados, and probably you would see it in the context of Africa, and probably you would see it in the context of Haiti, is that there is a lot of globalist agenda that is dictating and determining what is going to be happening in all of our countries. I don't think people are aware of the fact that very recently the United Nations shifted from being a multinational representative aspect to being a governing body, to the point that in the next global emergency, the UN can actually take over the sovereignty of countries. That is a very serious matter. And as a matter of fact, I think the United States was the only country that I'm aware of taking a stand and saying, you're not going to take over our sovereignty. It's not going to work. I observe as well some of the pushback from some of the African countries. I've tried my best to follow some of the things in the context of Africa, and I begin to realize that because of the financial colonialism that now exists, that the UN and WHO, WEF use those aspects to stifle your dissent. And not just in Africa, around the world. We have a saying in Barbados, he that pays the piper plays the tune. I don't know if that's the same thing for you. But as long as we are begging them for money and they're giving us, they will put us back into a colonial position, which I think many Caribbean leaders, either they're not aware of or just simply buying into it. I have the saying that there are a lot of, pardon the expression, there are a lot of black people that have not left the plantation.
That's a reality.
A lot that have not left the plantation and are still allowing colonial masters to determine for them what their future is going to be. I will say that in Barbados, I personally have been very impressed with some of the pushback from some of the African countries. Burkina Faso is one that is a particularly interesting study for me. How they push back against France. And I'm beginning to see one or two others rising up. But you did ask me to reference the aspect of faith, and forgive me for going around the moon, but it will have an impact on us. It will have an impact on our freedoms of expression, our freedoms to deliver a message, and not just only on us. The Rastafarian community, they look at aspects of our faith as being used by the colonial masters to enslave them. That can be very disingenuous to some people and cause offense. Then you have the Muslims. The Muslims do not tolerate in their faith any, let me be very careful, I'm trying to be politically correct, any similarities of sexual involvement. They're very, very straight on it. However, that now in the context of our world can create problems for the Muslim community. And that is where this cybercrime bill becomes a dangerous threat.
Definitely. You speak of the Budapest Conventions. I don't know if you or Mr. Howard will care to elaborate for people who don't know what that is and how that come into context with building that bill.
So generally, these conventions set standards that member states or member countries are obliged to follow. And often they will tag incentives like support in the guise of legal or political support to implement certain laws or legislation or types of legislation. So in the case of the cybercrime bill, the original bill was not written in Barbados. It was written somewhere in the European Union as part of a convention, and then member states are then required to implement it. Something my elder was saying, which is, in my view, some of these conventions deploy what would be social experiments in smaller countries. So in essence, we keep asking this question, who and why are we doing this to ourselves? Mia Mottley, being very similar, as I said, to our president, is an instrument for the pipeline to run a social experiment and figure out if we implement this kind of draconian laws, what happens? The second part of it, which is even more concerning, is what we saw in Kenya. This is the big similarity between what was happening in Kenya at the same time what is happening in Barbados, which is there's a um, an agenda that's not related directly to the bill. So the agenda, for instance, as again my elder was saying, is to implement a program of neo-colonization. And we already know that Barbadians will rise up against it in one way or another, through the civil society, through opposition, that could destabilize the country. In the case of Kenya, it was a finance bill, which had actually been written just down the street from here. And the idea was to impose a new set of very retrogressive, they call it progressive, but very retrogressive taxes on everything from toilet paper to pads to basic necessities like sugar and increasing taxes on bread. But before you do that, because you know that the population will react, you try to muffle them. You try to put measures in place to silence them. So that's what I kept asking, which is, and I still don't hear this conversation happening. People are concerned about the impact that it's going to have on their ability to express themselves. The truth is, the silent truth here is that no one is going to go there, policing religious institutions or what young people are saying. What they're really concerned about is the ability of people to organize, to exercise their freedom of association, to mobilize at scale, which is what social media has done in many parts of the world. We saw that in Kenya. Within a week of this bill going into parliament and American politicians showing up in our parliament, the young people spontaneously started to organize against the bill. And in a short time, they poured into the streets, challenged the bill. The bill was shot down. We also had protests here in DC at the IMF. In fact, that's the first time we met. So what really needs to happen is someone needs to think over and above what the issues with the bill are, which seem to have been very well articulated in very many different forums. What the ultimate agenda is for Barbados. Is Barbados being used as a social experiment to see how a population of 280,000 people react to this kind of legislation? The second question is, who is the architect? Is it really Mia Mottley? Or is she using it either as a stepping stone or as an agent for the piper? Who is that piper? And what's the ultimate agenda? Because when you're already trying to silence a population, which is what really happened in many of the colonial programs of suppression of the African people and other parts of the world, indigenous peoples, it made me think really, it made me think about like South Africa, where there was a series of apartheid bills, the Bantustan Act, which set up, balkanized the country into black and white areas, the miscegenation bills, which prevented intermarriage between black and white people, and on and on and on. So we have the cybercrime bill today. You need to figure out quickly what's coming down the pike and why.
We're gonna come back to dissecting that piece of legislations and doing compare contrast and how that's gonna impact. But before we do that, I wanna come to Brother Howard. At the hearing today, I watched how the government attorney spoke to you all in a condescending manners, and saying, yes, we had meetings with them and they are just here. They say the same thing. They're not bringing anything new to you here at the table. Basically, in a way to say, just hush them down so they don't have to continue to speak. And then, and speaking to the experience that Dr. Wangasu saw in Barbados and policing people on the street as a young man, your experience, if you can speak to that, and how having this type of bill will impact the activities of young people.
Thank you very much for the question. In terms of the scenario that the totally given versus what the bill causes challenges in the case of. Remember, it's a cybercrime bill. Right? He was speaking to a situation where he would have believed he witnessed some measure of in-person, live, face-to-face profiling or challenging intimidation on the part of law enforcement towards a young man, etc. So it's a little different, a little bit, in terms of you would be then come down on not for where you are or how you look, etc., but for what it is that you're expressing in your social media presence, right? What is your digital footprint, so to say? What are the views that you're sharing on your social media? Who do you align yourself with? Who do you align yourself against? What do you align yourself with? And what do you align yourself against? And based on these things, persons who may feel threatened or who may utilize the vagueness of the terms, which is one of the problems we have with it, the vagueness and the ambiguity of the criminal elements of the bill, who may utilize those to come against you, then you may find yourself facing troubles based on your representation in an online setting, different from a physical in-person encounter. So that's the simplest way I think I could put it, the difference between the two. However, I wouldn't say that it's any less distasteful because it's also distressing. Looking at that, as I would have said in the hearing today, up to $50,000 as a fine for expressing your opinion. And I gave an example where I was critical of a member of parliament, a member of parliament being an individual in parliament who would represent, a constituency representative, by the way, who would represent a section of the island and be responsible for them and be responsible for advocating for them, for making sure what it needs to be done in that area is done for the people in that area, looking after the interests of the persons in that area. I was critical of one of them because in his area, St. Lucie, there has long time been issues with the water quality. And he was saying to these persons that it's irresponsible for them not to pay for water that they're getting, which is supposed to be clean water. However, they're getting water that's brown, that sometimes smells, that ruins white clothes if it's used for laundry, that they can't use for cooking. And there are water trucks that are supposed to come, and they do, but they often pass during the day when persons are at work. So if the water truck passes your house when you're at work, you can't get any water because you're not there to receive it. So I referenced a piece in which I was critical of that, and the framing of the bill, as I expressed today, in the AOS building. If it is that he claims he is offended by what he said, and he thinks that is meant to cause or produce anxiety and humiliation for him, then he can further criminal charge against me. And if proved as such, I can be ordered to pay a fine of up to 50,000 USD, United States dollars, and or be sentenced to up to 10 years in prison. And I have a bit more time here with you now, and I could be a bit more conversational. We had the time limit there in the hearing, but if you think about 10 years of life, right? I'm currently 20 years old. If you think about when you were 20 and all the experiences that happened to you over the course of those 10 years between 20 and 30, right? If you think of 25, 35, right? 30 to 40, 10 years is a long time, right? A long time for development, a long time for learning, a long time for upward social mobility, a long time for perspective shift, a long time for redemption, a long time for a lot. And it's also a long time in an environment with hardened criminals for you to go there and be essentially tossed away, locked away, key thrown away, and left to your own devices until 10 years down the line, a decade passing. I think is a little short-sighted to think that that is the solution to miscommunication or what you may choose to deem as a malicious communication on the part of a juvenile or young quote unquote offender or convict under this bill that's passed. Because you strip a long time, you strip time that can be used otherwise to develop this person and help them to be a contributing member of society, a productive society, to actually develop themselves in some way that they can develop the economy, that they can start a family, that they can contribute to the community around them. There's a lot of things that these people can be doing, but when you create this very vague legislation that can be used so easily to paint so many people with a broad stroke of you are in breach, you're gonna find yourself in problems because a lot of persons are going to fit the criteria since it's so broad and so vague, and you will find yourself facing dwindling active youthful society. Because either the youth are going to continue to openly express their views and fall in breach of this, or they will self-censor, as we understand the chilling effects of censorship. They will self-censor, and then you still automatically decrease the vibrancy of the society regardless. So all in all, that's just some of the ways that it can impact us, and also in a broader context of the society, because we would be the ones to then continue to populate the society as we age and as we then start families and bring more persons into the society. You know, the circular life, it continues. So these young people that are 20 now, they're gonna be 30 in 10 years. Those that are 30 now, they're gonna be 40 in 10 years. Those that are 40 now, 50 in 10 years, 50, 60, circular life. So it's a continued progression, and that's just how it affects everyone.
Thank you for providing that wonderful response. But the other thing I want to ask you, you talk about the communal aspect of the bill, but when somebody is elected into office or have been selected by the community to be represented, they have a responsibility to be held accountable for doing the job that they were asked to do. So now with this bill, if passed and move forward, if the elected person will feel offended and get certain people who speak against it arrested or charged with a fee, that also remove the accountability aspect of them having been elected. So can you talk to that a little bit?
Right, and I would have spoke to that at the beginning of the response just now in terms of the example I gave earlier in the hearing with the same member of parliament, representative of St. Lucie. It's very easy to be annoyed with persons who are, well, one, if it is I have a job to do, and I know I have a job to do, and I'm not doing the job, and I'm happy getting away with not doing the job, and there's a set of people or one person who is pointing out the fact that I'm not doing the job, that one person is going to be an annoyance. Because without them, I can continue to get away with not doing the job, right? And so is very easy for when placing these vague terminologies of annoyance and humiliation and anxiety and serious emotional distress, when it is that persons are critical or even harshly critical of a government official, any form of authority, because it's mostly the persons in positions of authority that are able to utilize the laws to their advantage more so than the average person anyway. That's generally how it goes. Unfortunately, that's generally how it goes. So to exacerbate that with using the vague, broad terminology, whereby it's easier for this legislation to be abused, is very unwise. And so, like as you said, also it takes away from the accountability. It takes away from just productive discourse because, as I said before, conflict is just opposing views that don't necessarily directly aligned, and sometimes you have to voice both sides of the coin or all the sides of the circle of conflict, because there could be more than two perspectives. There could be three, there could be four, there could be five, and in voicing and analyzing those perspectives with some level of objectiveness, with some level of seeking to understand what is being said, and then see how that can all fit into the common goal or the common good, so to speak. That's how you would move forward. But without that risk of offense, without that ability to challenge the status quo, to speak about was not in vogue to speak about, and push aspects of society development that are not being heavily pushed in the mainstream, then you lose a critical aspect of what makes democratic society the beauty it is.
I agree, and I think definitely this piece of legislation is moved forward will box in the community and limit their ability and put fear in them to not speak out against elected officials who's not doing their job because they will feel harassed and they will get them in charge. You wanted to add something, Dr. Mungas?
Yeah. There's an aspect of this cybercrime bill again that I think that coming from outside as an outsider, Barbadians are so alarmed that they're missing the bigger picture as to why this could be happening. I learned when I was in Barbados and the time after that there's a slide towards authoritarianism over the last, let's say, 2 or 3 decades. This week we were supposed to have a conference called the Errol Barrow Conference. I believe Errol Barrow was the first Prime Minister of Barbados, and from all accounts, it seems like he was a very progressive, very forward-thinking, very visionary leader that set the country on the right path. He gave a famous speech. I think everybody again knows the speech. What kind of mirror image are you? What do you see of yourself? And one of the things he talked about in that speech was the hate that people who are in power exert and reflect on the people that they govern. Then he spoke about poverty, and he spoke about the abuse of mothers and citizens by government officials. In other words, what he was trying to communicate in that speech was government has a responsibility not just to take care and be responsible stewards of the country, but also limit their involvement in people's lives. And when you don't do that, when you don't take care of those responsibilities, you don't supply water, as our young colleague was saying, you don't provide jobs and opportunities for the young people, you don't provide business opportunities for women and career progression for men. When the society is retrogressive in that respect because government has failed in its mandate, then the only other alternative they have is to to overreach on their mandate to silence and prevent opposition from the people. Ultimately, I think what is happening is that you have a government which has realized that it has failed in its mandate to serve the people of Barbados. And this is typical behavior from autocrats. When they realize that their time is running out, they start to try and put, and autocrats here might be an individual, it could be a system. And it sounds to me like there's a very imposing prime minister who has realized that while she's very popular on the world stage in advocating for climate change, she has failed in her mandate to the Barbadian people. And as a result, she's now putting measures in place to retain power and to silence opposition to her rule. I think there was a lot of hope, it sounded like, when Barbados broke away from the crown and formed a Republican government. I think the idea there was that now that you could self-determine, you were going to move the country forward. But if she has failed in that mandate, and your elected officials have failed in that mandate, then the only thing they can do to retain power is to silence the population. And you first go for the media, but you also go for the young people, because the young people are the future of the country. Right? I really appreciate the imagery that you have used, that the young people, especially in those really critical years of life, are the most active in social media. Most of us who are in our millennials, who are in our 40s and 50s and 60s, older folks, by now, it's becoming a bit difficult to type on our fingers. We're not as nimble as we used to be, right? But this generation are fierce when it comes to expressing their views, using social media platforms to elevate social discourse, to challenge the status quo, to communicate and organize. And they know this. And this is why they're attacking you where it matters most. The cybercrime bill is not a bill targeted at baby boomers. Nobody who is 60 or 70.
The Gen Zs.
It's Gen Zs. It's you who's being attacked. Let's not sugarcoat it. It's the young people who are being attacked. You're being attacked because you're the future. You're the ones who have the most leverage and the most ability to organize on these social media platforms. As I said, we've seen it in many parts of the world, in the Arab Spring happened on social media. The revolution currently happening in Kenya happened on social media. So they're concerned, and obviously they're going to come with everything that they have to try and silence the voice of the young people.
Mr. Howard, before I go back to Dr. Nichols, talk to us a little bit. How do we, I would say, lit up a fire, but in the good sense, for young people to mobilize, be proactive about this cyber crimes bill so they can speak, and how do they go meet with members of parliament to ensure that their voice get heard?
That's interesting. I like the reference that was made to the popular speech by Earl Barrow, his mirror image speech, because they actually had done a piece last year earlier this year, for Earl Barrow Day, using his speech as reference. And it starts off, what I wish to speak to you about today is yourselves and how you see yourselves. Do you really like yourselves? There are too many people in Barbados who dislike themselves, and their dislike of themselves reflects in their dislike of other people. And that's how he starts. That's how he opens this speech that was referenced. And I have a piece on that. I actually was gonna ask if I could share it after I answer your question, because
Most definitely, if you have a piece you want to share, sure.
yeah. As I said in the hearing earlier, and I will tell you now I'm a spoken word artist. So that is where I'm more comfortable in those pieces residing there. And I could speak otherwise too, just straight to you. But I do feel inclined to share that piece as well. Also, I prefer to be a little more interactive. Y'all know me and seeing me, and I don't know anything about you right now.
We're gonna go to
so
questions soon and
not
then
even
we're
just
gonna interact
questions.
with them.
Hi, good night. What's your name? Well, I
Do you
know
have
this
a
young
mic?
lady here. I mean, yeah, you
Do
just
you have a
have
mic for the
with
audience?
the
Yes, go ahead.
yeah, yeah. Just say what's your name, where you're from.
Yes, that's the artist in
I
it.
wanna see my
That's the
So you
artist.
can start from the very back and come down. You can start from the very, very back.
Go to the back and come up, yeah. Your name,
Yeah, just your name and where you're from.
Where
It
you're
doesn't have to
from.
be your full name. First name can work, an alias can work, whatever.
I'm Adrienne from Barbados.
all right, Barbados in the house.
Just be from Virginia.
Just be.
Yeah, from Virginia.
Alright.
All right, Virginia in the house.
And would be Babaile from Sankofa.
All right, Sankofa here, who?
Yeah, just
Jerusalem from Ethiopia. Jerusalem.
Jerusalem, that's the full.
Yes,
Okay.
Ethiopia.
Okay.
Salim from Eritrea.
From.
Eritrea
Eritrea.
Okay.
in the house.
We're all introducing ourselves.
Yes.
Yes.
Donna from DC and Oakland.
All
Okay.
right,
Okay.
Oakland and DC in the house.
Brian Bernard, Caribbean American, Trinidad and Tobago.
All right.
Yes,
TT.
close,
Uh-huh.
Diana.
Yeah, man.
WBFW.
Albert from DC, and I do have some questions if you don't mind.
All right, we're gonna be getting to you, Albert. We're gonna get to you.
We're gonna get to you soon.
Star Bowie from Washington, D.C.
Starbury.
Star,
Bowie.
Bowie, DC in the house.
Michelle, I'm from Barbados. and
Hey,
I live in
Michelle.
Florida.
Oh, you in Florida in the house as well?
All right. Cool.
All right, you wanna share your
Cool.
piece with us?
Definitely. Thank you so very much, people. Thank you for indulging me in that exercise. Now I feel a little more connected to you.
See, you want that energy.
No.
Understand?
Yeah. So the name of this piece is called Mirror Image. Image mirrored. What I wish to speak to you about today further and very briefly here this evening is about yourselves. I want to know what kind of mirror image do you have of yourself? Do you really like yourselves? There are too many people in Barbados who do not like themselves, and their dislike of themselves reflects in their dislike of other people. Based on the longest reference I found on YouTube of Albert Barrow's famous mirror image speech, that is how he started it. What is the mirror image reflected in the state of the nation and in the eyes of the people? Not the navigation system of a political party. Notice I said the navigation system and not the vehicle. We hop on the campaigning bandwagons and expect them to take us anywhere other than where suits them and be. When we are sometimes not even too sure where we want to get. The way I see it, just like my brother Thierry Ginnins, a friend from UE, says, we would never progress until we are free from political dependency. BLP, Barbados Labour Party, DLP, Democratic Labour Party, FLP. Because when you France, it matters who help you. Yes, we all need help, a support system, a community, but to integrate into that healthily, we have to start saying, let me help me. We look out for politicians sometimes to do too much of what they're not supposed to be doing. I was talking to a gentleman the other day and he said, all the government has to do is show us their brain. And then it's up to us to see if we think that they have what it takes to uphold their end of the bargain while we do our part, to put presence of mind to the problems plaguing the nation and pen to paper in ways of wisdom, not a wistful wishing, but purposeful planning, and to understand what we want. Then as we write the vision and make it plain, maybe then we would see more beneficial policies landing for consideration. And maybe we would even get to see the implementation. We got to be smart about it. Because when the agendas of a few in power don't reflect the desires of the people, before we blame them, we have to blame ourselves. Because we put them there. Not to do foolishness, but we put them there. That's how the voting works. So pick sense from nonsense when a politician starts coming around your neighborhood, talking, and you haven't seen anything happening from them since last city season. That's what election thing is called. What's the reason? Ask yourself serious questions. We're free from monarchy, so questioning these potential leaders is not treason. And I would pause the piece there. Further on, I have a little more major dialect, so I don't want to confuse the audience. But I will pause the piece there and leave
I
that
think that was your way of answering my question.
to somebody.
I got it. Ask questions when the politicians comes into your community. Don't be silent. And if you're following the cybercrime bills, they're asking you to silence yourself. So if you silence yourself, you will not get actions. Be proactive. Is that it? Did I get it? All right, Doctor.
There are a couple of aspects that as we've been chatting that have been running through my mind. The aspect of bullying requires a superiority on one side as opposed to the other. And as I gave consideration to the cybercrime bill, which is supposed to address the matter of cyberbullying, I began to give thought to the fact that government is the bully and are themselves engaging in cyberbullying in an attempt to utilize their more powerful position than their citizens so as to impose a particular perspective on their citizens. So government themselves are involved in the aspect of cyberbullying. Along with the fact that I often smile because the only place a government minister is protected by law is in Parliament. On the campaign trail, if he says something that offends me and it's carried by YouTube, I can equally take legal action against him. And so I wondered, how stupid can you be to implement a bill and a law that threatens you? It seems somewhat ridiculous. And then I also want to look at the aspect of the matter that we did not engage very much. As a matter of fact, I don't think we engaged at all today on the commission. It just goes to show you how many aspects of this bill are problematic. One of them has to treat to the matter of how evidence is acquired by the law enforcement officers. And the position in Barbados at the moment, well, I shouldn't say at the moment, the position of Barbados under this bill would give a law enforcement officer the right on suspicion to go to a magistrate or judge and acquire, what do you call it again, a warrant to invade your privacy and your home and seize any device in your property and require you to unlock it. The question then arises, what happens to the privacy of information on those devices that are nothing to do with you? Along with the fact that a neighbor could, for example, suggest that I believe that Eugenia has guns in her home. And a law enforcement officer can use that expression and go to a magistrate and obtain a warrant. To us, that is an overreach of law enforcement. And then how is my private, personal, confidential information protected when that device is in your possession. And these are some of the aspects that the cybercrime bill leaves very vague and well, not even very vague. It leaves it, what should I say? There's an imbalance in power here that is of deep concern to the citizens of the country. You know, one of the things that the lawyer that spoke for the government today suggested was that, and pardon the expression, don't mind them, that was just a little handful of people. You just had an election here in the United States.
Yes, indeed.
And what I observed was that in each of your states, you are divided into several counties. And the last I checked, there are only 400 and some representatives in Congress.
Right.
There are not 370 million people in Congress. So to look at the four persons that were sitting at that table today and suggest that it was just them ignores the fact that we represent 100,000 people in a 280,000 population country. One of the other things that one of the commissioners observed was the fact that, and you know, again, the lawyer attempted to suggest that, here and you, they've been saying this over and over and over. I don't know how many of you have children. I have 3 children and 6 grandchildren. But at least over the next 10 years. But one of the things I've observed is that you often have to repeat the same thing to a child over and over and over and over. And the commissioner raised the question, or raised the idea, I should say, that if the people are saying this over and over and over and over, then somebody isn't listening. And I felt that that was a slap in the face of government. As we engage and it is a fact, I mean, as a matter of fact, given the number of interventions that I've observed to do the cybercrime bill, it is not always a case of people regurgitating the same thing over and over. If you are listening to the people, and you're going to extract certain terminologies from the bill, but you're going to leave in others, and then you're going to increase the penalties, it would suggest to me that you're not listening. I'm mindful of the fact, and it's interesting, I have always said, and I repeat it, and I continue to repeat it, I will tell any senator, congressman, parliamentarian, or prime minister or president, you work for me. I am your boss. I employ you. And if you don't do a good job in the private sector, you generally get fired. And so when we have members of parliament who are not doing their job, one of the things that we are now considering in Barbados is a new republic constitution. And one of the things that I propose is the power of recall. Where if a member of parliament, I don't know if you have it here in the United States, but if you don't, it would be a good idea to introduce it. Where a person is not performing their task of representation, get rid of them. Elect somebody else. These are matters that are going to be engaged in the new constitution of Barbados. And again, I have referenced the aspects of term limits and the inability to call a snap election. You here in the US have 4-year terms for presidency and 2-year terms for House and Senate.
The Senate is more.
Senate is more, but 2-year terms for the House. But they're fixed.
Yes, you're right.
They're fixed. No president in the United States can get up tomorrow night and say, let's have an election. They're fixed. You just had one, November the 6th, I think it was,
The fifth.
the 5th, 2024. The next one should be November the 5th, 2028. In Barbados, the Prime Minister could get up tomorrow morning and call a general election, prorogue Parliament, and call a general election. She has the power to do that tomorrow morning. Our feeling, my feeling, I should say, is that that type of power must be removed from the Prime Minister and be fixed. These are the types of things that very often, when we begin to voice them, this is where Mia Motley gets upset.
Because you're touching her
Because,
power.
yes, you see, and again, the people are their employers. And, you know, I realize that Barbados is a small community. And there's a lot of personal interaction among our people. I heard the lawyer attempt today to suggest that because of how small the country is, it means that the politicians are interacting with the people all the time. That is a joke. I live there, he lives there, she has lived there, and we don't see politicians more than once in every 5 years. Am I right?
During the election time?
That's election. We are facing a shift of legislative agreements in Barbados, including the cybercrime bill, that have far-reaching implications for the future of our country. When I am in Gloryland, I don't know where you are going to be, if you're going to be in Ethiopia, or you're going to be in Kenya.
I'll be in Haiti.
But where is he going to be? And where those 6 grandchildren I have going to be? Barbados is currently approximately $8.5 billion in debt. For a country that generates very little revenue in terms of foreign exchange. My question is, what are my grandchildren going to do when we are gone and leave them saddled with that debt? And these are the kind of things that when questions of this nature are raised in Barbados, the government is very offended by the concerns of its citizenry. And it's because of those kind of things, and I'll give you a very quick illustration. I think earlier somebody mentioned about, I think it was Timon, you mentioned about your expression to do with Mr. Phillips in St. Lucie. But in a public meeting, in a constituency public meeting, one of the potential senators, he was supposed to be a senator, I don't think he obtained it, but a member of the governing party, blatantly expressed from the podium that we need to implement laws in Barbados that protect our politicians.
For what?
What that suggests to us, and I pray God it does not come to you here, is that they are suggesting legislation of this nature that removes the capacity for criticism of government. When you do that, you become a dictatorship. And it was funny. I could not believe that the attorney mentioned the CCP today in his expressions. The most dictatorial country on the planet. And you are going to reference that as an example, Chinese Communist Party. And you're going to reference that as an example? People in China have no say. They're dictated to. That's not the case that we are going to be satisfied with in Barbados.
You want to add something?
Just to the point of, you were speaking to the, there was a point you wanted to hop onto when he spoke to the history of legislation in Barbados. And even today in the hearing, the person who presented on behalf of the government, he would have spoken to, you know, the rich history we have in our parliamentary system, our governments. You know, we have one of the oldest in the Caribbean, and you know, but he failed to mention that the vast majority of that was in the time of colonial oppression. He failed to mention the fact that the first slave code was written up and instituted there. He fails to mention that that was literally the frame and society in the heat of the time where we were used as the model for slavery, chattel slavery, globally, right? In the Americas, rather, I should say, in the way that it was fashioned and then. So it was very interesting. It was very strange that the government brought on external counsel to represent their position, which then created a kind of detachment and distance from the actual issue itself, from the people who came to speak to them. And this person who they brought to speak then spoke of the warmth and the openness in discussion and the robustness of the discussion and discourse that we have. And it was such a strange juxtaposition, because even the way he spoke and the way that you could tell the ideas that he has of, well, not even the ideas that he had, the ideas that he presented of the nature of how things are conducted in the island of Barbados, the nature of how, even as Dr. Ferdinand would have said, in terms of how frequently we actually speak to our constituency representatives and politicians for matters, it's not that frequent. It's really not. It is not. It is not. 166 square miles, but still it is not that easy. Trust me, I have had conversations with persons who know that there are politicians that have one house that people know about and another house that persons don't know about, so that when it is they don't want to see people, they can go to that house and they don't have to hear anybody.
That's right.
So for the external counsel to come and speak, and to speak as though he knows, you know, he spoke very, very confidently in the first instance, probably because he was confident in the information he was given and fed. But for him to speak down to us as though we are wasting our time for repeating the points which were ignored, which we then decided to push to a higher level in order to get more eyes on the situation, in order to get a larger body and force and momentum behind the movement of actually keeping the government in check and accountable. For him to insinuate that that was a waste of time was rather distasteful, to say the least. Yeah, so those are just a few points that would have came back to me based on what you were saying regarding the political system, which brought me back to his comments on our almost 400 years, you know.
Was your Attorney General there today?
No, the Attorney General is not there. However, the gentleman who chaired the Joint Select Committee, which was the body of persons who heard the complaints and reviewed the complaints that persons would have brought regarding the bill, whether it was written submissions or oral submissions, he was present. He chaired the meetings where there were the oral submissions. So I myself would have sat in Parliament and spoken to him and the others in the Joint Select Committee before as well.
The other thing and I've been really itching to say this, by the way, having listened to my senior and my junior. So it's something my mom told me a lot when I was growing up. When people show you who they are, believe them. When people show you who they are, believe them. In other words, I almost shudder when I hear, and I've heard this not just from you, but from in different quarters in Barbados, that they are not listening. You best believe they are listening, and they're doing what they want. So when they, the last time I read the bill, of course it's of interest to me, but this is not all. So I don't keep up with it every week. So I think I read the bill in around July. The penalties were something in the range of $70,000.
Yeah.
And then now I looked at it this evening and I'm like, wait, we moved up to 100,000.
Yeah.
It's not because they're not listening; it's because they are listening, right? They obviously have an agenda. The attitude, it seems, is almost incredulous. Like, how can they do that? And you best believe that this is what they're doing. So you need to match up your actions and your reaction to what it is the intention is. Don't second guess that intention. Because the cybercrime bill, we have similar laws in Kenya. We had a security bill that was passed, which was very similar. There's also other things they're going to tag on to, which is surveillance. Because for them to be able to not just seize and confiscate, they're going to have to put instruments of technology to do mass surveillance.
Yeah, to monitor.
But what is a very small population? I was thinking about Barbados in context of my city. So I just like you, I ran for political office in a constituency in Nairobi. I have 150,000 voters, more than 200,000 people. So our constituency and our constituency in Lanata and Barbados are it's just about more than 2/3. And it gave me the scale of the problem with respect to like how small a country Barbados is and how easy it would be to like control that population of people. The other part of it is, other than being up to the task, is also just making sure that you organize your position. And as you say, this is not just a fight for the present, but a fight for the future of the country. Because what seems to be happening is there are people who are scared of the future. They're not just scared of the young people, but they're scared of a future where you have an open and engaged society. Because then, as you say, they need protection from the people because they know that in a Republican constitution, they'll need these instruments of power to be able to control the population. And what tends to happen is before any war ends, I know we've had this, but wars are most fierce at the end, not at the beginning. Why? Because you're trying to gain as much ground as possible before the white flags go up. So the white flag in this case will be the Republican Constitution, which will be expected to be open. So they want to set this precedence early, before. So I have said this a lot on the Marcia Week's show. Barbadians need to be up to the task because they're second guessing what it is, the intention of your prime minister, your governors, your senators, your elected officials. You're second guessing those intentions because there's a sort of disbelief that anyone could be so retrogressive or undemocratic, but you best believe that is the intention. And you need to be up to the task to deal with that situation.
We're gonna move to the audience to take questions. I don't know if you have any last comments, but I think one of the things that as you push for this, people to become aware of this bill, if they're not getting it, when I talk to folks, I said, can I feel it? Can I touch it? Can I sense it? Can I smell it? So through your spoken word, help Barbadians feel, touch this piece of legislation and how it's going to impact them. Maybe you can do it as soon, but I will give you a chance to do, but not right now. But that's something to work on. Maybe they're not feeling it, it's there, so it's not dealing with me, then I don't have to touch it. But when it become clearer to them how it's gonna impact them, they can feel it, they can touch it, they can sense it, and maybe then they will wake up and begin to smell the coffee.
Yeah, and then, sorry.
So I think the past 3 years have developed a level of distrust in governments unprecedented in the history of our world. The pandemic has caused, because of the actions taken during the pandemic and the autocratic actions taken during the pandemic, where governments unilaterally imprisoned their people with impunity under the guise of attempting to prevent the spread of a disease. And you don't want to get me into this matter because I've hosted several online conferences to do with the pandemic and to do with the virus and to do with the aspects, the military aspects of what was released upon our world. But what has resulted is that citizens no longer trust their governments. Full stop. That is anywhere in the world. Australia is going through this, New Zealand is going through this, Israel is going through this, India is going through this, and to a large degree, Barbados was actually a guinea pig for one of the treatments that came out of India. It was not tested anywhere first, but in Barbados. And I think that we need to pay very serious attention to what the globalists, and this is not a conspiracy, this is a fact. I have so much evidence to back up what I'm saying. If we had the time, we could engage. But we have to pay attention to what the globalists are experimenting with around the world in countries that they consider are not important. And so we can carry out this mass experiment to see what the ramifications are going to be. In the context of the cybercrime bill in Barbados, we have seen a very similar cybercrime bill in Guyana, a very similar expression in Antigua, Grenada. These are countries that, in my view, the globalists are using to experiment and use their ideas to see what is the response of the populace. I don't know that they will try it in a country this large, because I think, and especially in a country, they'll try it in Barbados. It's interesting sitting here listening to how you describe us. Our general expression is we're passive people. And there is a history to why. During the slave trade, England kept the most controllable and docile slaves for Barbados. Jamaica received some of the most violent and rugged slaves. Hence, nobody tries this crap in Jamaica. Because if you try it in Jamaica, you're going to have a riot. Barbados was also the hub for the distribution of slaves across the United States. If you notice, there's sugarcane growing in North Carolina, South Carolina, that came from Barbados. The whole experiment of slavery that became prevalent in the United States began its history in Barbados. And so there's a sense in which that DNA has come down through the years. And so Barbadians are apt to talk a lot and do nothing. However, there's a generation of Barbadians such as Timon that are no longer accepting the passivity of the older groupings of persons. And they're now demanding responses. I call them the Y generation. My grandchildren move the bottle. Why? Put this here. Why? Move that there. Why? Everything, there's only one letter in the alphabet they know. Why? So that was not definitely not my generation. You asked why in my generation, you were looking the opposite direction with the assistance of a hand from either your mother or your father. So this, our generation, is the passive one. These guys are not going to tolerate what we have tolerated for the past 58 years or more. Well, I probably should say 400 to be consistent. Okay, so I just wanted to express that because it helps you to understand why different countries in the Caribbean respond to challenges from their governments in different ways. And it has a lot to do with the type of slave that was utilized within the context of that country.
I think the one of the last comments I have with respect to just strategy in terms of how we deal with this, the other group of Barbadians that we're not saying we need to talk to are the politicians, much as they are the adversary in this equation. They need to be communicated to. I was giving an example earlier of a law that was passed in Kenya in 1963. So Kenya had just come out of independence. We were still trying to figure out whether we'll have a parliamentary or presidential system. Then the then President Kenyatta the first, decided with a group of his loyalists that they were going to prefer a presidential system. And obviously there was going to be a lot of opposition. So the first thing they did was to put together very similar laws. Back in the day, there was no social media. What was a big threat was very vocal groups of politicians or groups of activists. So they put a law together that famously came to be known as the detention without trial law. So essentially the government could search, seize, and detain you without any cause for as long as it needed to under this new law. So it was passed very quickly without much debate. And the person who actually originated that law was a man by the name of Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, who is the father of Raila Odinga. Now, the first person to be arrested under that law, he's the one who originated it. So it's the mere mortal in this case. The first person to be arrested under that law when he demanded political space to his boss, Kenyatta, was him. So he was the first detainee under that same law. In other words, what's going to happen in short order, simply because politicians are the most talkative people, I think the first victims of that law are going to be politicians. The population will subdue, but the first victims of that law are going to be politicians. So they need to be talked to. But in the broader context of you want to create a culture and country, not just for the present, but for posterity, that's an open society where what you've described in very colorful words, a society where ideas can clash and improve, and a society where people learn how to find consensus. That is the group of people I think that needs to be communicated equally, that the society you're creating is going to affect you the most.
You have the last word? Otherwise, I'm going to take questions because you took the Let's go ahead and then we'll go to questions.
I'm not sure how familiar the audience is with the national anthem, so I will recite a few of the lyrics in particular reference to the piece. In plenty and in time of need, when this fair land was young, our great forefathers sowed the seed from which our pride is sprung, a pride which makes no wanton boast of what it has withstood, which binds our hearts from coast to coast, a pride of nationhood. The chorus goes, we loyal sons and daughters all, do hereby make it known. These fields and hills beyond recall are now our very own. We write our names on history's page with expectations great, strict guardians of our heritage, firm craftsmen of our faith. Sometimes I think deeply on the anthem. Maybe these fields and hills are beyond recall, not for long standing, but rather for all but abandonment, because we simply choose to neglect them, or otherwise let other folks come in and take them, and we forget them. Our focus landing on strips like planes, looking quickly to the coast and ships docking in harbor, giving our attention to the tourists coming to appreciate our nation more than we do. Yet still, we sing that these terraces and gullies, elevations and depressions, expressions of our landscapes, identity still desperate to maintain self despite deforestation of true local vegetation from monocultural plantation, damn near all across the nation face. I mean, how far across good land can you drive and not see a cane field or some remnant of a plantation system and plantocracy? Somebody answer me. How do we keep a straight face when we say they are now our very own? When we are standing, do we pay attention to the fact that our island is becoming more and more a first row Westerners' home and less of a West Indian's own? Call it what you want, but the facts are clear, and he who has ears, let him hear. Our tongues tell the tale of our ancestors stripped from homeland, traveling the Atlantic on packed ships, seasick, drowning in blood, urine, watering flesh, and feces, among other things, surrounded by screams and songs, agonizing tongues, and other more well-fed mouths that belong to some who did not share your pain but caused it, necessitated it, amplified it within the bounds of not damaging the goods beyond functionality, unless, of course, there wasn't much hope for you, for them, in way of adding to the labor force anyway, because against that backdrop, you were useless automatically. And if you made it, landing on shore to be purchased and entered into a system of treachery against humanity known as child slavery, of which this country, Barbados, was the primary model. We really forget what independence means? Not just for us, but the whole Caribbean scene. Do we really forget that is when we, Little England, Lizzie's baby, poster child for English colony, broke free? Broken the trident, but it seems we held on to so much still. System of government, education, some residual legislation, and we lost a lot too. And that's an extract from another piece. Thank you.
That's wonderful.
But that's an extract from another piece of which I examined the anthem. And that was prompted by something you said. I can't remember what it was you said that prompted it, but I think, oh yes, it was you speaking to us being the ones that are fiery and you being more passive, etc. And being willing to accept the way that things have been for the last 50 years. I do also see in my own circles, but I am not necessarily the most typical young person per se, people would tell me. But I do see in my circles a general consciousness of the shortfallings of our society, the areas for improvement, methods for improvement, and willingness to work towards that improvement. And I think that as myself and the other persons who are along that same plane of societal development, and those who we also touch and spark that light inside, and those other persons who we may not have even met as yet, spark that light inside, as we all come together and push forward in that vein, I think that we could make some ground. I think that answered your question from earlier.
Yes,
actually,
indeed.
as well.
Thank you. So now if you have any questions, we'll take some questions from the audience, our speakers. We have on mic.
Oh, Albert was issuing.
If you want to give us some light so they can see the audience a little bit.
He was first.
Wow. This is kind of deep. I hadn't expected to be we learn a lot, I'm sure, we learn a lot. I appreciate you coming. I just want to be clear about something. If the Parliament and the Senate and the PM were to pass such a bill hypothetically, I mean, aren't they subject to the bill? I mean, are they above the law? I mean, common sense is going to say, if we pass this and this becomes a law, and we are law-abiding citizens, even though we're in Parliament, we're in the Senate, well, we got to abide by it. That's common sense. I mean, like, I just don't get that. But then there's another element that was mentioned that's really disturbing to me. It has to do with self-hatred. You know, that's kind of deep. Do we like ourselves? Do we love ourselves? And if we don't, why? You know, if anybody on a panel want to address that, I appreciate it.
There's an aspect of a societal development in Barbados that has come off of what I call the plantation. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the operation of things, but we had a set of slaves that operated in the field. We had a set of slaves that operated in Master's house. And the set of slaves in Master's house were seen to be superior to the slaves in the field. That mentality has not left Barbadians. We have a statue in Barbados called the Buster statue. Maybe you saw it when you were visiting. It's a statue that stands in a roundabout with his arms raised and their chains hanging from his hands. I came over the brow, heading down towards that statue one day. In my field, we believe that God speaks to us. And I heard someone say to me, the chains are still on his hands. The chains are still on his hands. And as I heard that, I began to ponder, what do you mean? And the thought crossed my mind, you may be independent and free from the colonial masters as a government and economy, but you're still imprisoned in your mind. And it is within that context that the self-hatred has developed down through the years, where Barbadian people, and I guess it could be said of other nationalities, but since we're addressing Barbados, Barbadian people do not appreciate their own. And in not appreciating their own, they can't appreciate their own because they don't appreciate who they are. And they can't appreciate who they are because the colonial masters down through the years have told them, you are nothing. And the master slave has perpetuated that thinking through the political system in Barbados. I am a very independent thinker because I've been set free. I don't allow anybody to determine for me who I am. And I often say to people, don't cross swords with me because I'm not on the plantation. I left the plantation. So be very careful how you cross swords with me because I'm no longer enslaved in here. I hope that answers your question.
Excuse me.
Let me just throw in a comment regarding the imagery that he just provided. So in India, they tame elephants. And an elephant is a very large and very powerful and strong animal. But they start when they're young. And all they do is that they tie a chain when they're still too small to break. And as that animal grows into a monstrous animal, it still believes that that chain can hold them. In other words, when that animal is freed, as long as it sees the chain, it will not move because it believes that that chain restrains it, right? And that was the slaver's mentality. You subdued, you enslaved the person's mind first, and then it's just a matter of time to enslave their body. The other part of which is even more interesting is that the most efficient slave hunters or slavers were not the colonists, they were fellow Africans, because they know how we think. So the most efficient people in doing the kinds of things we're talking about today, the kinds of things we've seen in Haiti, if you want to subdue Haitians, don't send American forces, send Kenyans, because we Africans, we know how we think. We have the same DNA, we have the same power and strength. So it is concerning that whatever the force behind this cybercrime bill, and whatever is coming down the pike, that's my warning to the Bavarian people. Whatever is coming down the pike, you need to be prepared for that and preempt it. Understands that fundamental fact that the chain is still there, and secondly, that the most efficient person to do the dirty job or the hack job is the Barbadian people themselves.
One thing I would like to mention, Dr. Kerner, you said a similar thing could be said of other countries in terms of the nature of what we experience as Caribbean people. But one thing that was brought to my attention very recently, which I've been pondering about more recently, has been mentioned to me, is that the island of Barbados, for the most part, is flat. We don't got the hills like Jamaica, right? There's no running away and using guerrilla warfare like the Maroons in Jamaica, right? We don't have hills to run away to. It was just proper plantation from coast to coast, proper plantation. So that exacerbates the issues and aggravates the issues and amplifies the issues that you would find in societies with a colonial history, because there was no escape, so to speak, right? We didn't have, like I said, using the example of the Maroons in Jamaica, there were no large masses of communities which were actively resisting, actively maintaining some form of culture in a community aside from the plantation system. It was just proper plantation, right? And so it was very hard for our people to organize. This was a mentor of mine speaking about the difficulty of Barbadian citizens in organizing things amongst each other, because that is the climate that we came from, and that's why it's so hard for us to actually see things move forward, because it's hard for us to work together as people to actually push to a common goal, because the way that things were set up, we didn't have a structure to do that. We didn't have a secluded area, a refuge, so to speak, that we could, as I say, go catch ourselves or regain our composure or collect ourselves as a mass and then have some kind of collective front. But in speaking of the idea of Barbados as a plantation, this island is a plantation. Been a plantation. Tobacco, the sugarcane, to other alternatives withheld and restrained to tourism. And through all of those products, the one culture planted was pain, its roots into which every iteration was grafted, rigid, and twisted, our DNA ingrained. This plantation is aging, and this plant isn't changing. Through stages and phases, it's staying the same. We have a history of consistency and high yield. Highest producers on a global scene, long time. Proudly perpetuated the title of Little England and presented happily as a docile child for a long time. I say again, we have a history of consistency in high yield.
We need to break away from the plantation mentality. Father, you have a question?
That's not a question, really. I'm a little bit conflicted. One, I didn't even intend to even have anything to say because I was much more interested in the actual topic of the tyranny of this progressive, so-called internationally with a face, progressive face, in this draconian measure that's happened. That's really, I think, where the panel should have stayed. But I think when it went to slavery now, we're in a quagmire now because we are making a lot of completely unhistorical statement on slavery. And I'm very hopeful that I don't get misunderstood, especially with my brother in the left and the Kenyan brother, because for me, no African who came through the Middle Passage, man or a woman or a child, is recorded as passive. No docile Africa ever passed. There's no such a story of docile Africa first, because Africans, you can go now even, that's the problem. We just, we're doing it still. So for me, this docility is a very colonial language. The master thinks you're docile, but your brain is 1,000 miles away from the master's mindset. And all rebellions testify to that. All Africans, the punishment in the coast of Africa, the punishment perpetrated against Africans, chopping them in pieces so they wouldn't jump, because they thought they can jump and walk through the belly of water back to Africa. So for me, all the way to Haiti, is the history of resistance. Black people did not accept any idea of slavery. The corporal punishment itself came because of rebellion and resistance. And so for me, I think, one, our language is wrong when we say slaves, because there was no slave race in Africa. As far as I'm concerned, enslavement is the right word that could take us out of colonial mindset. Enslavement. And I don't want to, make this a big issue, but I think in America, we're taught, all of us now by now, not to use the word slave when we refer to Africans, because there's no race of slaves. Enslavement, the experience of enslavement, whether it's to Asia through the East African corridor to Asia, all the way to China, or the Middle Passage, it's another story. So I hope this is not disrupt, because I think you were teaching us good. We were learning about this very fundamental issue in Barbados. And my brother from Kenya, wait, you're in a hurry to answer. These Kenyans that have gone to Haiti don't have a clue of Haitian mindset, not even have a clue. It's like you telling me, a Nairobi, somebody from Kenya or Ethiopia or Sudan can play jazz because he's African. He can come to America and really understand jazz that is coming out of Louisiana. Africans in America, in the Americas, have created a new language that we're still studying. Books all over this whole shelf. We're still studying all the way to Haiti, Brazil. These Africans that have invented a language that's still not being decoded yet. And so I think we should be careful there. And that's why I'm a little bit I'm at this height, because I just think, finish teaching us about this woman you have, which is as far as I'm concerned, a very serious issue. She has a very powerful propaganda machine in the global context. She has England behind her, etc., etc. But like my young brother says, Jamaica, cockpit, Africans, where they had place to run, they rebelled. Bajans in South Carolina, once they came to South Carolina, the topography reinforced their militant idea and rebelled. All the South Carolina, the Gullah Geechee, all that rebellion is out Africans. From where? Bajans. Now, we can talk about the years of enslavement, the brainwashing, which also was touched about self-hating, which is, I think, Africans still now, Africans in the continent, in Kenya and Sudan, and Ethiopia and Nigeria and Kenya, and South Africa, we still hate ourselves. We haven't even begun to write books about it. At least Africans in America are writing a book about this. In the US, very well exhausted, the self-hatred, psychological trauma. Fanon, George Jackson, whoever you have, all these books we have can tell you that. So I'm saying, let's stay out of this psychosocial analysis because I think it's going to divert the objective of this panel discussion. To me, the panel discussion is giving us something that here in this community that we can rally behind. I'm like sitting there, could not believe, because I myself, however, thought I was highfalutin. I felt your prime minister was progressive. And it's amazing what I'm hearing coming out of Barbados is like shocking. It's shocking because her intelligence is so seductive that it disarms anybody, any critical thinker in the world. So I'm sorry I said too much because my brother, let me tell you, I criticized you, but I learned so much from you. Now I'm talking to my elder here.
If this was Barbados under the Cybercrime bill, I would accuse you in court.
Excuse me, my brother. I got you. By the way, you guys made that point powerful. I'm telling you, I'm educated about that because it's going to Africa too, for sure. It's an experiment, as most of you said. But my brother, I just want to say to you, in spite of my heated self, I learned so much from you. I believe you. I think you're a very powerful resistance brother. But I would suggest take some of our books with you because there are certain things your militancy, I think, needs to adopt, in my view. I can give you South Carolina. The first place I studied, I made a film on slavery. The first country I studied is Barbados and Brazil. For 10 years, I studied these places. It's an amazing history there, it's still not. But what you guys went with the British colonialism, that I think is cracking with his work, the mental colonialism, we can learn so much of what happened to Barbadians when we understand what the British did to you guys. Sorry, I apologize of the heated. I was really sleeping, actually. Not sleeping, but learning from you guys. Sorry about that.
I appreciate it. I'm not sure if you were here when we did the exercise where everyone went around.
I didn't want to say nothing because I felt.
No,
excuse me. No, excuse me. This is it. For me, I felt it was not necessary to introduce in ourselves.
Okay.
And I opted. That's what I thought you were talking about, democracy, freedom, not to be.
I just want to say thank you. The aspect that we unfortunately can't separate is the current conduct of our leadership and their history. And that is where it comes in terms of the cybercrime bill, because we cannot separate who we used to be from what's happening right now and the development. You're absolutely correct in the context of the colonization. And that is something that we are trying to break out of now. We have become a republic. And the perspective of that is that we want to change our parliamentary procedures as well. I have always, whether good or bad, looked at the United States as being a relatively model republic in the separation of powers: Congress, Senate, President, Supreme Court. In Barbados, the Prime Minister chooses magistrates and judges. So you can see that colonial mentality ongoing, and hence that's where it would come in to try to bring about the shift that we need in our country. So I thank you, appreciate that so very much.
Also, there was the aspect of the question of why do we hate ourselves? That was a question that was posed from the audience as well. But like I said before, I really appreciate everything that you said as well. And sorry, don't want to interrupt you, so you can go ahead.
Sorry, let me just. So this is what I was trying to describe earlier. There's a certain cool that Barbadians have. So I think you've seen it in action. Yes.
What I want to say is that I hear all the conversations, but I think mental slavery is what is still there. We have
Very
some
much
of
so.
it, we have some of it at home. It is some of it here in the United States. Everybody who's been through this enslavement process, we've got much healing to do. And we carry a lot of that baggage with us. So with regard to Haiti, I have not touched base on Haiti much since I wanted to just focus on Barbados and keep my Haiti hat in my pocket. But I wanted to add, and earlier on in your conversations, you talk about the removal of a nation's sovereignty. I will say that's already been done to Haiti when the United States, France, and Canada had a meeting in 2003 with Denis Paradis, where they decided to put Haiti under trusteeship, leading into the removal of Aristide from office. And we are still dealing with that. As present day, in one of our ministries, have somebody either from the US, from the French government, or from the Canadian government who's monitoring, overseeing things in the country. So with regard to Kenya being in Haiti, you and I, we've had a little bit of touch on this conversation. Kenya is in Haiti because, Ruto needed some money. The US said, okay, if you decide to be the puppet, we're gonna give you access to money. So yeah, they give him access to money from the World Bank and the IMF and whatever other things that the folks from the State Department promised him. But what we in Haiti wanted Kenyans to come as brothers, not as puppets of the US government to do. And Kenyans are in Haiti, they are not doing a damn things right now to assist Haitians with the insecurity challenges that we are having because they are there at the mightiest of the US government. They don't go out to conduct any operations unless they have the blessings of the US Embassy. And mind you, when Kenyans first arrived in Haiti, the first place they went to protect was the US Embassy, not Haitians. So they are not there to serve the Haitian peoples. The trucks that are coming, the military hammers that are coming into Haiti, they are coming from the US and they are the worst kinds. The Kenyans cannot even use them to go out to patrol the streets and help out because the weapons that came from the US in the hands of the Haitian gangs are far worse. That the Kenyans said, you know what, I'm gonna stay where I am in this encampment and I'm not stepping out. So that's not helping Haiti. So right now, Haitians want Kenyans to go back home. If you are coming as
Kenyans want Kenyans to go back.
Okay, that's not what we want. We have, when we look at Kenya, we think about how you become an independent nation. We look at the Mau Mau movement and we go back to our own movement. That's what we want to be working in solidarity with. That's what Ruto is bringing into the country.
So there's another school of thought on the Kenya-Haiti issue that's becoming more and more popular, particularly amongst the opposition leaders, which is Kenya has a long history of peacekeeping. Has a long history of peacekeeping, not just in Somalia, currently in Congo, in the Horn of Africa, in Somaliland. We're known as a nation that brings people together to have conversation. And there's a reason for that. There's always sort of the history behind Kenya being multi-ethnic in ways that other parts of Africa are not. So we're used to building consensus. And the hope had been that instead of sending military personnel, that we would take a lead in leading the peace negotiations, including with the gangs, because those people we call gangsters are young people who are dispossessed and disillusioned by the powers that be. What Bob Marley famously called Babylon, right? I was also reflecting on Jamaica, and the same thing pretty much happened in the 70s. And peace only started to come to Jamaica, although that's an issue that's still ongoing, when the gangs actually spoke to each other, and when the people spoke to their brothers on the streets who are fighting. So there's a school of thought that's emerging now. Kenyans are not militant. The only time we get militant is when our freedom of expression, our freedom of movement, our freedom of our sovereignty is threatened. But there's a school of thought that's emerging, and I think we want to encourage, that's saying, yes, let's be involved, but let's be involved as peacemakers, not as a mercenary force sponsored by Colombia.
I hear you, but I wanna come back to Barbados, but money and peace, I know they always work together. So, Kenya is getting, the whatever they call it in Spanish, they're greens, they're mullahs, so it's not about peace. And I remember in the very earlier phase of this process, when Ruto's wife had a conversation on Zoom with Barbecue, one of the heads of the gang, and that was like, what? So from there, Haitian said, you can keep your peace, that's not what we need. So bringing peacekeeping missions, we've had a ton of those, and Haiti, they had done nothing for us. When you have a peacekeeping mission, it does not build infrastructure, it does not build roads, it does not provide, that's a whole other
So
discussion.
it's
I'm
a
gonna
peace building.
Peace building.
It's
Yes,
different.
so,
Peacekeeping is a military.
Yeah, but even that, I'm sorry, my brother, even that Pan-African, for example, if you go to Haiti with America or French flag or American assignment or French assignment or British assignment, that's the wrong foot to begin with. Like, yeah, excuse me, but if you do AU, a Pan-African, all the African people, without being given the agenda from the West or Europe, but to come up and say, we need to be involved in our people's issue in Haiti. For me, this is a mercenary work, and I'm sorry, my brother, you're going to see body bags. You're going to see body bags of Kenyans, and that's a tragedy that I'm foreseeing coming, and that's tragic. But if you are talking about the real concern about our African brothers in the Caribbean, in the Americas in general, every time they're in situation, if AU, if African Union makes a meeting independent of European and white dictation and say, then Africans in America would be so emotionally touched, that is a peace entry, not through the US flag or like, oh my goodness, my brother, I get tongue-tied to tell you, I would never go to Haiti with an American jeans even, American flag in my chest and come out alive. Unless I don't know what the hell is it. The French flag. Is this the country who tore the French flag into pieces? The psychological story of that in Haitians, I've taught at Howard University, Haitians, it's imprinted in their head. The flag tearing of Dessalines. So for me, I think when we don't know America, we should leave it alone. The Americas is a unique, but I think we can make a difference if we are independent of colonizers and former slave owners who created the whole tragedy. If we're free of them, then I think I'm for you. But what African leader has the guts to think independent? What he said about Barbados is African governments, south to north, east to west. We're a joke of a country.
I want to be conscious, ma'am, you've been holding the mic for some time.
go ahead and ask your question.
Well, actually, it's kind of a long comment. And
Okay, you can go ahead.
Okay. Well, several things. I mean, I say this with all due respect as Euro-American, but my understanding of Frantz Fanon's position is that people who have been colonized, and I would say by extension, those have been stereotyped negatively as stupid and backward, like women, you're never free until you have vanquished the people who are oppressing you, vanquished them. You have to know in your mind as a people and as individuals that you have power over them, and that's going to come through being able to stop them, and if it means killing them, it means killing them. And I just think that there has been a huge impact from revolutionaries from the Caribbean, CLR, James, I think Kwame Ture, James Baldwin. I mean, the impact has been huge. But the real point I wanted to make is that I think we need to really look at this discussion. It's really been fascinating. I didn't know about this bill, and I was hearing that the Barbadian president was really progressive. And why did I want to come to this from my serious from Jamaican friends? And so this has been very illuminating. But I think that a lot of the questions devolve around how are we defining democracy? And I think that there is a whole school of thought of Marxism. There's workers' democracy, and there's what we call bourgeois democracy, ruling class democracy. The way the Constitution was set up in this country, the Electoral College, the division of the legislative and executive and judicial branch, the separation, all of those things were designed to keep popular power away from the people and to fool them. We've been brainwashed here. And people here who are working class, the US people don't even like to say they're working class because they have been so indoctrinated with the idea of, an individual success in the American dream they can't face, and when they have to face it, like some of the Trump supporters, they become absolutely enraged if they don't have an alternative. But the key thing is to recognize that what we're calling democracy, whether it's parliamentary or presidential, it isn't. You can't separate out the question of popular power expressed through the vote without looking at the economic order. And it's only a tiny number of people around the world, the imperialist class, the corporate class, that really owns the means of production for the essentials of life for all of us. And we're just being fooled all the time. And I just want to give one example that I think everybody got fooled on, and then I'll stop. We heard people were pretty enthralled by the kind of good arguments for the right of Palestinian self-determination and their right to resist, and that all indigenous people that were given the UN. And we heard praise for South Africa and for Netherlands and for Spain and for, I know that there are countries in the Caribbean and South America. How wonderful, and everybody bought into it. I did, and I thought, gee, this is strange, because these are capitalist governments. But these are marvelous arguments and passionately made. And then I actually read it. And when they applied it to the borders of 1967. Do you know what that was? 22% of the historical Palestinian land. That thing was a joke. And until we see through, we're oppressed because we don't see through these things because they are constantly manipulating us. If you don't have a progressive revolutionary idea in your head, whatever idea you have, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's always some product of conditioning to accommodate the rich class. Thank you.
And this is part of why, in response to that comment, I'm of the view that there is a larger machinery in play. The means of production in Barbados is certainly not the Barbadian people. And I would even say it's not even with the political class. It's something over and above that, unlike other countries, for the reasons that I gave before, and the reasons that have been given, this idea of the plantation economy that has really not changed. Now, the plantation owner, or the person who controls the means of production, dictates how people live, the social norms, the cultural norms, what they think, or what they're supposed to think, for that matter, if they're free people. So, what I think will eventually, or continues to happen, and we see this across the Caribbean, because colonial masters have retained a certain amount of control on the economy, more so than in African countries, because we're much larger, we are more diverse, we have had revolutionary movements, sort of with the exception of Haiti and the examples that you gave, but the plantation mentality goes over and beyond just the local population. So there is more coming down the pike. I think Barbadians have a very difficult question to answer. I think in Haiti's case, it's clear. But in the case of Barbados, there's going to be more coming down the pike. They just need to establish really quickly what that is and what the overall design is.
I want to circle back into talking about that crime bill and what that's mean for Barbadian and the issue of democracy. democracy, people's power. What it's mean for us here in the United States doesn't mean it's gonna be the same things for Haitians, or it's gonna be the same things for Kenyan, the same things for Barbadians. So I think in looking at this cybercrime bill and looking at, okay, now you are an independent nation, you are a republic, what does that mean for you, for your present, for your future in moving forward? And that's where we need to be looking at. And when you take language from other countries to create a bill, it does not always resounds with the people within that country. We need to define for yourself as Barbadian, what is it that you want these laws to look like based on your culture, based on your custom, your everyday thing. So it fit into the type of lifestyle people are dealing with every day rather than importing it from elsewhere and letting it into your country.
Much of it, and I'm on record as saying this on more than one occasion, much of what Barbados is engaged in at the moment does not have its origins in Barbados. I've named 3 elements of the international community in which the origins of what is coming to the Caribbean are sourced. The World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, and the United Nations. These are the rich globalists. As a matter of fact, if you look at the World Economic Forum, you'll discover a group of people who are not even elected to office. They're the super wealthy of the world that are making determinations for countries, even from an economic standpoint. Our agricultural sector in Barbados at the moment is undergoing some pressure from much of that concept of the WEF. That's one side. Barbados has what is referred to as democratic socialism. I don't know, I'm sure you've heard the term. In the sense that Barbadians or Caribbean people see democracy as the opportunity to vote, and the socialistic aspect is government taking care of certain aspects of the country, health, education, agriculture, that type of thing. My view is that governments are supposed to be facilitators, where the people do what is in their best interest. But the government sets a framework in place to facilitate industry, agriculture, manufacturing. The difficulty that we have is that government often gets involved in those things. And you had a president here in the United States of America that made a comment that I hold very close in my aspect of life. I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. Some of the most fearful words to hear. Barbados is still developing. I mean, if you look at the rest of the world, Barbados is actually quite a young country in terms of its independence and in recent years of its republicanism. And I still think that we're searching our way through to find what is the best operational system for our country. Unfortunately, and I heard it expressed today in our commission meeting, I heard reference made to this was done in that country, this was done in the next country, this was done in that place, and I'm sitting there asking, why can't we do our own thing? Why do we always have to pull what's done over here, what's done over here? Okay, I get it. You look at the different aspects of development and within the context of the cybercrime bill. And let me just say, the fundamental aspect of the cybercrime bill is actually a pretty good one. It's there to help protect against child pornography, cyberbullying, fraud, what we saw happen in our BRA, Barbados Revenue Authority recently, where I think it was I can't remember, somewhere around 80 gigabytes or 230 gigabytes of personal information to do with Barbadians who's gone up through the door in Bottom Island. We understand the cybercrime bill is a valuable asset within the context of things of that nature. The Budapest Convention that we mentioned really focuses on those kind of things. But what is difficult for us to engage is that the Barbadian government is seeking to introduce aspects of the cybercrime bill that other countries are actually moving away from. And deregularizing in their countries. And what we see is that based on the massive majority that they have in parliament at the moment, there are 30 seats in the Barbados parliament, 29 are occupied by government, 1 by opposition. Who was in government? And so the real opposition in Barbados must now come from its citizens, working in collaboration with the leader of the opposition. Now, in the commission today, one of the attorneys turned to me and said, this is a DLP, what he referenced, Democratic Labour Party representation. I said, no, it's not. And I took him to task on it. So we are searching our way through as a country, as a new republic, to find what is the best operational system for us. I have no problems in taking things from different places, but to suggest that because it's done here and it's done there, it's okay to do it here, I will not accept that. I will not accept that.
Mr. Howard, we're moving close. We are moving to close. And how do we move forward in the context of how you present your work for young Barbadians?
Excuse me, sorry to disrupt.
Yes, sir.
Again, the Budapest that you keep mentioning, is it, who organized it? What country? Is it the UN organized? Well, could you tell us the organizers?
The Budapest Convention.
Yeah. Because it was mentioned many times, I still don't know.
No, where it's,
Okay, where did it originate?
Pull that information.
okay, so he's gonna pull it up and share it with
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, but in the meantime, Mr. Howard, how do we take our young people forward in looking at establishing policies by Barbadians for Barbadians?
No, I'm not getting it. I'm not getting it from here. I think it's the Council of Europe. I think it's the Council of Europe. I think it is. I think it is. In Geneva, I think it was in Geneva. But I think
That information will be confirmed for you by the others a little later. But I believe it's the Council of Europe. I do also remember the gentleman that presented on behalf of the government speaking to the council and speaking to the council's influence on what they had as their foundation, and then they took what was the foundation and added their own additional provisions, is the way that you phrase it, to the bill. But to answer your question, they can get to you, buddy. To answer your question of how we move forward, they actually had a piece of one to show on that, but it would digress. It would digress. But I would say strategy is important. I would say that unity is important. And conversations like this are important. So I don't really find any challenge with even the discourse that's going on right now. Buddy and Ibahi, has his points to say, and on this point of contention, etc., because iron sharpens iron. And so as information flows, and perspectives are challenged, we grow together. So I believe that partially having spaces where we can grow together before then going forth on a more wide scale to inform the general audience, I think that is helpful. I think that standing together with movements and making sure to stick together is helpful. And I think that persistence with it is helpful. Because we have and we would have spoken about this as well when you were in Barbados. We have a 2-week syndrome in Barbados, a 2-week syndrome whereby a problem would occur, and Barbadians would be in an uproar, and in the next 2 weeks, gone with the wind. The fire is no longer is out, and the pressure is no longer there. I'm thankful and grateful and blessed to have been a part of this moment, which has pressed the cybercrime bill not just for 2 weeks, but for over 2, 4, 5, 6 months. No, yeah, we've been pressing this, and so having community that can keep on a task and focus on a task and persist in a task, I think that's useful. I think that's useful. Yeah. As the saying goes, before, just to add something a little more poetic, there's a proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Whoa.
So I would advise that we stick together and go together.
Excellent, Dr. Anderson.
So I went to this island paradise with the idea that I was going to sit under the sun and enjoy a week of celebration, but it turned into something else. I remember my wife telling me, make sure when you go to Barbados, once she realized I was getting involved and I was now part of the official opposition, she told me, be careful because you don't want to take that Kenyan fire in your belly. Barbados, you could get locked up abroad. But it really made it clear to me that engagement is important, and not in the paternal or condescending way in which you've described that your governments or external parties are, but in the way that we are supporting the efforts of our brothers and sisters who are trying to fight for self-determination, who are fighting for their sovereignty. What you realize quickly is that, as I say, this kind of oppressive experiments, they spread like cancer. And if it works in Barbados, then someone is going to decide that it could work in your country as well. Or someone might pick it up and say, oh, this is a new model legislation that's working in Barbados, and let's try it in our part of the world. So I think sustaining that engagement is important. As you said, if you want to go far, go with others. In Kenya, we call it, in Sub-Saharan Africa, we call it Ubuntu. Yes.
What is the word?
Ubuntu, the power of the village. Yes. Ubuntu. In South Africa, there's a saying that Umuntu, Gabantu, you are a person because you are with people. In other words, Umuntu, Gabantu. In other words, that's the power of the village. So let's form a village around this idea, and let's form a village around this opposition. Hopefully that means that in a few months we'll be talking about the cybercrime bill, not the cybercrime act, having failed.
All right, Mayor Bill Shaipalu, in unity, Esther.
To answer your question, the Budapest Convention, it's actually the Council of Europe, and of course it gets the name Budapest Convention because that's where it was originated, and it was designed to help to counter cybercrime, espionage, that type of thing, using computer systems, those kind of criminal activities, fraud, theft of identity, those kind of issues, child pornography, human trafficking, bullying in the cyber space, technological space. But just to briefly answer your question, it originated within the Council of Europe. There's 78 countries, as far as I'm aware, that are signatories to it, out of 196, I think. But one of the challenges, not just with the Budapest Convention, but one of the challenges facing us in Barbados is that our government often is signatory to many agreements that have never been discussed with the people of the country. And it is things of this nature that come up because of that. My feeling is that you have a representative for a constituency, and if the government is giving consideration to the signing of a document that is likely to change the entire future of the country, it should first be discussed with the citizens to see what the ramifications and how the citizens feel about it. Unfortunately, that has never been, that's why I laughed at the guy when he talked the nonsense he talked about. Unfortunately, there's never been a government in Barbados, to the best of my knowledge, that has ever discussed anything with the constituents before they have signed any agreements. Governments in governments in Barbados, when they're elected to office, they become our masters, and we become their servants. And so they do whatever they want to do, especially if they have a massive majority in the House of Assembly.
All right, we're gonna move to its close. We're gonna let you begin. If you want to take 2 minutes to give us your closing remarks.
2 minutes.
I thought I already did.
Okay. You'll pass the mic to that.
I don't think I need to exhaust anymore.
All right.
So I think y'all kind of see where I stand.
All right.
Also, please.
I just want to say thank you to you, Eugenia Charles. You have a very well-known name in the Caribbean.
Yes,
Very well known.
we share different politics.
Yes. But the first woman prime minister, I think, in the Caribbean ever. But I want to thank you for the opportunity to come and share with your team, your people here. I want to thank my friend back there. I appreciate your comments. I'm very intrigued because our educational history and system in the Caribbean does not really expose us. I'm tempted to say too much, but I'm going to say to any of our African history. Regrettably, I grew up in an environment learning European history and the association with European history that led to the dominance of our colonial masters. And we are now learning, as both as a country and as an individual, about a lot of our African history. As a matter of fact, 2 recent appointments that I received have brought me into very close contact with Africans, and I'm beginning to learn a lot about Africa. The one thing I do identify is that Barbados is a right side of Africa. If that means that if I take this map and I held it up, you would be looking at Barbados. All right, so maybe there's such a connection with the two countries. One looks one way and the other looks the other. But I really appreciate the exchange that we've had tonight, and thank you so very much for inviting us to be a part of this. Unexpectedly, I would have to say.
Oh, thank you. I think everything happened for a reason.
Yeah, first, thank you for hosting. Thanks for having us this evening. For our amazing guests. Thanks for the engagement. I think it's very healthy, and it actually illustrates the exact issues that are on the table here. How having the ability to make public your opposition or your comments about simple issues like a forum end you up in jail because you vexed or annoyed a person. That should bother anybody. I am not here on any official capacity. I think I was sued just because I own one. But I'm not here on any official capacity. I'm a misplaced tourist. I was supposed to be in Barbados, they say, to enjoy the sun. Ended up in a storm. First a hurricane, then now a political storm. The reason I'm saying that is because the few people we have in this room should be concerned and give whatever knowledge, insight, support that we have. I got the opportunity, for instance, to work with the opposition to figure out these responses. I've been on various forums in Barbados. So let's use those collective voices. As I said, let's use the power of the village. And it doesn't take many people. This takes a few who have right, which I believe the people in this room do, and let's give this small nation the support that they need to push this draconian bill out.
Thank you. I would like to thank each and every one of you for coming out this evening. A special heartfelt thank you to all the staff here at Sankofa for receiving us, for making themselves available to assist in putting this presentation together. A special thank you to Marcia Weekly, who was not able to be here with us, but is here with us in spirit. We are thinking about you. Keep the struggle going. Remember, no matter where you are, we are all people. We all have bloods running through our veins. The struggle in Barbados, the struggle in the United States, the struggle in Haiti, it is all one struggle. Let's work to build our community, to save and protect our children. Let's remind governments that they are there representing us. We elect them into office. The decisions that they are making must reflect the ideology of the people.
Okay, first I just want to thank my sister. She rocked the boat a few weeks ago here, and I hope it's not the only kind of you're going to do. We expect you to do more because really we're sidelined by this issue. You know, where we have been, where we're focusing, which we should. But I think you really brought a very important point because I know I wish my wife was here. The lady, this guy's prime minister, is dangerous because she speaks so things sometimes we want to hear when you look at the international racism situation. She's so good in the articulation.
Very eloquent speaker.
Yeah. And so again, I was thinking of the British colonial mindset. She's really amazing. So anyway, today you at least cleansed me from being a victim of her misrepresentation. That means like learning doesn't end.
That's right.
To the end, you're learning. And so it was very important for me. So we want you to do more of this seriously and give us more. In fact, I was apologizing with my outburst.
That's right.
No, because I felt these were things that were very special to me. These are like, especially the African spirit of resistance is so misaligned by history. And the experiment done on the African brain is still not even reached. And so I was responding to that, but the most fundamental part is how I learned. And I'll tell you, I'm not a religious person, but I would join your church. You're very progressive. You really have a good philosophy and ideology, and I didn't want to divert that. I was really trying to, but then my nature. Thank you. So we'll do more, and you're going to help us because you do have a good contact. It's really in such a short time you organize an amazing panel, my sister. I'm still, when is Kenya coming? I mean Haiti.
Haiti on our mind, it just passed, so now we have to
No,
go.
it didn't pass, it's coming.
Yeah, but we have to go with Gaza on our mind on November 24th,
Yeah.
and then Sudan, and then Haiti.
So we have this thing, we started out with the Gaza crisis called Gaza in Our Mind. And we have every other Sunday gathering the community and responding to the situation. Then the very community said no, do Congo. So yesterday we did Congo in Our Mind. And then the community again that empowered us, that gave us this liberated territory, demanded also we do Sudan,
Haiti.
Haiti. So Haiti, Kenya is going to be our big topic. We're really going to mess with Kenya because we feel this guy from one of the most important Pan-African legacy, Kenyatta's country, a guy comes to really give Africa in silver plate. And he's merciless, sweet, and like the sister from Barbados, very articulate. So we're going to have, hopefully we can talk to you, I'm going to talk to you, because I want some of the young people who burst, if they're here or by Zoom, we can get them. They can, yeah, so we need a Kenyan to be present because we fear this situation in Haiti is dangerous. It's a very dangerous booby trap. And so, we hope we can help us get the panel. We have a film ready that we're going to show, etc. So please, folks, don't miss it. Keep supporting us. I know when it gets cold, less and less folks show up, but don't give up on us. Thank you for coming. Thank you for you guys for gracious. You're great people. By the way, Barbados was one place I was going to shoot Sankofa, and then I didn't like it. So I had to fly out and go settle for Jamaica. So I still have so much respect for that country. I'm telling you, the study I've done and the way I learned about slavery, people wonder about how I made this or that. But one of my whole hard study was I learned in Barbados so much. It's a precious country for me. I know them all the way to South Carolina, how they got there, etc., and what they do. In the Sterno Rebellion, a whole lot of Barbadians were involved. It's a well-known rebellion in the American slave landscape. So thank you very much for coming. You could hang around. We're not going to close the door and communicate with the individuals, take their information, and you want to announce it. I think we've said it. It's okay. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.